You're listening to On the Payroll, my podcast about project management, consulting, software delivery for CRM such as Salesforce or Microsoft CE, leadership, teamwork, and anything and everything in between are topics that absolutely fascinate me. Also, it gives me an opportunity to speak to guests that I like about a topic that's just riveting to a nerd like me. On today's episode, I record part 2 of my conversation with Chris Pearson, who's the Salesforce Platform Director at Jostens. And we already recorded part 1 on previous episode, and I felt that there were quite a few things I wanted to discuss and talk about further. And ta-da, that's today's episode. In this particular recording, we talk about quite a lot of things over and above what we've discussed previously, and that includes things such as recruitment, in particular, how new talent can break their way into the Salesforce ecosystem. And as Chris has done a lot of hiring, he shares nuggets of his experience and information on how candidates can stand out and make a mark in such a competitive world we live in today. So I hope that you enjoy today's episode. Thanks a lot. Hi Chris, welcome to part 2 of my podcast on the payroll. How are you today?
Oh, doing great. Thanks for having me. Happy Friday.
Friday is always a happy day. Our last conversation was really very, very fascinating because, as I mentioned to you, you're probably the first person that I know that's covered so many clouds in the Salesforce ecosystem from a customer point of view. And I think that adds so many feathers to your cap. So I think if at any point you want to jump ship into consulting, I know loads of people who would want to get their hands on you. But apart from that, I'm actually kind of interested a little bit more about your personal journey. So if you allow me to ask the questions, I would like to know a little bit about your childhood, your growing up, your schooling and your learning in terms of how it's shaped who you are today.
Sure. A very broad question. So you'll have to kind of help me guide me down the path.
Take it wherever you wish to go. Let your own gut feel guide you, and I'll let my curiosity guide me in where we take it.
Yeah. Well, I guess from a regional perspective, I'm based here in Houston, Texas. I've been a lifelong native Texan, so born, raised, spent my entire life in this state of Texas. And, so if I think about my prior to university, so going through high school and elementary school and middle school, you're almost constantly asked as a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be? And I never really had that crystallized vision. I admired others who were so laser focused. They knew exactly what they wanted to be. And, that kind of probably inspired a sense of jealousy to some extent. And so I had great grades and all of that, and decided to go to an in-state public university, a really large school called Texas A&M University, which has a size of, at the time, around 40,000 students. So, I was a small fish in a very big pond. And I started my career, my undergraduate career in the business school. And again, didn't know exactly where to go, and kind of followed parental advice to go down this path of finance, because I was told at the time, finance will give you the most career opportunities because you'll get a little bit of math and numbers, and then you're going to be applying it to more management style and kind of giving both sides of the coin. But it turns out I really didn't like finance. I would say I coasted my way through. I studied enough to make the grades and came out with a degree in finance, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted to be independent. I had been raised by my parents, who are still married today, about to celebrate, I think, their 45th wedding anniversary. I have a sister who's younger than me, who also joined me at school. And I was motivated to really prove myself. I really did not want to move back in with my parents. I was determined to find my own way. And my first job out of school was actually in the retail world, working at a clothing store that kind of has an interesting reputation. I don't know if you're a fan of Abercrombie and Fitch, the clothing store, much more of a younger clothing targeting the younger kids market. So I spent about 3 or 4 months doing retail, and there's nothing like doing a certain job that can really help crystallize what you want to do. And in this case, it helped me understand exactly what I did not want to do, which was working in retail, working the crazy hours, dealing with, we all have to deal with people, but dealing with people in a retail scenario was, I think, very different than an office situation. So from there, I was able to kind of hop into a couple of different jobs that were more in the finance realm. So kind of like relying on my background from school, and as a credit analyst, as a mortgage underwriter. But I'd always had a deep-rooted passion for technology, for electronics. It was always something. From the very first time I got a computer, I remember, I think it was maybe my 11th or 12th birthday, where, and this is going to really date me, but the present, my birthday present, I think for like my 12th birthday, was a dial-up modem. It was a 28K, whatever they call it, modem. And, with all the beeps and scratches and all of that, but it connected me to the internet, and that really started to open a door for me. Of course, I was going through something called America Online at that time, but that's what I think really what kind of started to distill and figure out for me was planting seeds in this world of technology and how could I apply it.
So what did you got your modem, you're connected to AOL. What were the kind of things you did when you were online at that time?
It was a whole lot of just reading, exploring, understanding, like downloading programs, downloading applications, trying to play games, and really sort of see what the world of computers and the web offered at the time. But it was completely as a consumer side. So it's tough to sometimes relate some of that to what I do now, other than saying that it was an interest and there was a desire to learn more. And I think that kind of carries over to me today. Like I'm motivated by learning more, figuring out how you can apply new things, new principles to solving problems or helping people solve other problems.
So here's a question. In your current role, you're a head of department, am I correct?
Yes.
Do you take a very active part in the recruitment process of growing your teams?
I do, absolutely. So, the promotion, the recruiting, the hiring, the onboarding, the feedback sessions, the coaching along the way, totally.
So tell me about what you observe as, so obviously let me split the question slightly. So the people who are looking for jobs, that there'll be those who are experienced. What I'd like to focus on are the younger generation who's just come out of university. Compare and contrast that to when you came out of university and now you're meeting all these young folks. How are they different from you and your peers when you left university? How are they different?
Wow, that's a good one. I think I don't know, maybe it's the fact that we're sometimes tough on ourselves, but I think the younger generation has exceptional communication skills. I would say, what I've noticed is they're used to communicating in different types of mediums. So whether that's engaging on social media platforms, like I've started to recruit directly on LinkedIn, and whether that's the verbal or the in-person meetings and all of that. The other thing, though, I think that hasn't changed is still the fact that a lot of times in my experience, when you're going through university, they're not exactly preparing you for the reality of the corporate world. They're kind of almost filling your heads that you should be a certain place in your career. After I remember hearing from some business professors, in 1 to 2 years, you're going to be a manager and you're going to be responsible. And this was speaking to a very broad classroom. And so when you hear that and you're an undergrad and you don't know any better, you start to internalize that thought and you start to kind of create this journey for yourself. And to me, it led to a lot of frustration, because I had this mindset of you're supposed to be at a certain place in your career at a certain time. And I think that we can really find ourselves comparing ourselves to others or comparing ourselves to the thoughts of or the plans of others or professors who mean well, but may not be in touch with exactly your industry or the type or the size of the company you're doing, or even the type of job you're doing. And so I find I try and impart that wisdom on or that experience on the younger generation is really saying it's going to take time. Acknowledge, like I find myself getting frustrated that I think I'm going to have it all figured out. Like I'm going to understand this brand new 2,000 user org. Let's just talk about like my current situation. 2,000 user org, 3 different business units, 3 different clouds. I'm thinking, okay, I've done this Salesforce stuff for a decade, and I've been a business analyst / project manager for another 10 years prior to that. I'm going to get this, and you kind of like have yourself psyched up as far as, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to totally have this complete understanding of the business model and the business process. But I found myself really getting frustrated because it wasn't clicking. And I think that's something really important to the younger generation, is to know that it takes time. It takes, for me, learning the hard way, making mistakes, but then recognizing what those mistakes were and then doing your very best to not repeat history.
So let me take you back to something you said earlier, where you said you felt that they communicated well. I'm just going to drill into that slightly. So what I'm noticing is you're correct. The younger generation do have a much more affinity for technology because they grew up with it. And social media and etc. But a lot of the communication is through the different mediums have been short, like tweets and messages and emojis and things like that. And they've got good handled in terms of, communicating that way. But how about what you just said there about taking time to understand something that requires deep thought, and also even with all the experience that you've had, it was still not as easy as you thought it would be. Now, I think, just looking at my children, I think they're very in the instant gratification kind of mode. Oh, you want to buy something? Mom, can you just add it to Amazon? And is it going to be here tomorrow? It's a bit like that. Oh, I want to watch this movie. Is it on Netflix? There's no real waiting. There's no real sense of, if I want to make a deep friendship, I actually have to do a bit more than just send a couple of spammy texts. That's what my son's doing at the moment. How about those who are coming through? So when you say they communicate well, do you see a level that I don't see in terms of when you say that they're able to grasp the communication aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean to paint an entire generation with broad strokes. There's a spectrum, right? But if you look at it, there is never before been a time where you've got individuals who can create their own platform. They've got style blogs, they've got YouTube channels, they've got newsletters, they've got thought leadership. I mean, in the Salesforce world, you see, all sorts of that. People who are, learning new skills and then starting their own volunteer organizations to kind of bring up other individuals. And these are individuals who are still at the very early part of their career. But there's also others that, that may not have as well refined communication skills. I guess recently, I was interviewing for a junior Salesforce admin position, and this was an individual who had engaged with me on social media, and impressed me enough where I said, let's put this person through the process, the hiring process. Let's have them go through the paces of talking to HR, talking to some key team members, and the reviews were all positive. So it was time for her and I to get on the phone or get on a Teams call and start talking. And it was interesting because she immediately froze up and, kind of at the beginning of the conversation just said she was extremely nervous, and it was off to a pretty rocky start. So we, I tried to kind of break her down as far as, understanding, to talk to me about your background, what you're looking for and all of that. And she gave me some great answers and all of that. But then we got to a point where I said, well, so, what I've been throwing some questions at you. I want to give you the opportunity to ask me some. And she said she didn't have any. And to me, that it took me aback, because I think if you were from a younger generation, I was trying to put myself in her shoes, thinking she felt like she had spoken to multiple people in the organization and probably asked a lot of different questions to understand expectations, and felt like she was comfortable and knew exactly what the job entails. But she missed an opportunity to really reconfirm those expectations with the hiring manager. And I think that is something that reconfirming expectations, constantly setting, realigning expectations, is such an important life lesson that I need to get better in my personal life. And I definitely need to continue to in my professional, because I find myself creating in my mind what I expect to see. We've been working on this project. Let's go through a demo. I want to see, I want to see this well orchestrated demo with a great storyline where someone knows the exact click paths to go through, and it really pops and it's succinct and tells a great story. But that's not always the case. And so to me, what I found helpful is to start taking those expectations out of my mind, putting them on paper, writing them down, verbalizing them. And I found that to be a more helpful technique for communicating.
So there's a couple of things in there. So one was with regards to the job applicant. So she had no questions for you. And it sounds like the fact that she missed that opportunity to I think not just reconfirm her expectations, but also to connect with you in a slightly different way was the opportunity that was missed. Was she successful in getting through? Did you think that?
She was successful. She was successful for several reasons. She demonstrates like enthusiasm. People underestimate that skill. It goes a long way. There is nothing more energizing to me than talking to someone who's excited to talk to you. Like I don't think we would be having this conversation for a second time if I didn't express some enthusiasm about talking to Peg. So that goes a long way. From there, I realized that this is someone who's at the very beginning part of their journey. They don't know what they don't know. So I asked a couple more probing questions and started to kind of peel back the onion, and then got a couple more questions with her. But the things that if I was in her shoes, I would have wanted to reconfirm. Things like, you don't have to get into the technical details of Salesforce and ask, what edition are you on, and how many custom objects or users do you have? But things to me that show that high emotional intelligence, like what's your management style? How do you communicate expectations? How do you celebrate? To me, another great question. How do you celebrate wins or accomplishments? And how do you recognize people? And what happens when you miss deadlines? And what do you do? Like those are, to me, questions that are great ones that you should ask in any scenario. Whether you're working to be hoping to be a volunteer or a consultant or joining on a client team, and no matter what your role is, I think the answers to all of that can really set your expectations so that you are not walking into a situation where they aren't met.
Those are scary questions, though. They're not questions that people are used to asking, because a lot of people won't tell you what the true story is. They'll probably tell you what you want to hear. So they are scary questions for a lot of people to ask. Like, what would you do if I messed up? What do you know what I mean? Because it just carries so much judgment and punishment and a lot of negativity. So I think that's if someone asked it, it would show a high sign of emotional intelligence. You're absolutely correct. But I think I'm thinking back, younger me would just never ever ask about this.
I agree. It takes a certain point in your age, I don't know, in your in moving into adulthood, where you get a little bit more confidence. You stop caring as much, and you've got kind of that stronger backbone. And everyone gets it at a certain age, and some people have more of it than others. But to me, it took experience. It took being treated a certain way for me to start asking those questions. And I guess I would chat. I hear you on those are scary questions, but my answer to that is, what's scarier, not knowing the answer to those questions and having to find out the hard way? Or would you rather know those up front so that you can at least make a decision? Would you rather know in the dating phase or once you're married?
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the second part of what you said earlier around communicating your expectations, and we're talking about wanting to see a demo and see the happy path and etc. And you felt that just articulating it that way wasn't good enough, and that you had to come right down to the details. Is that correct? You actually write it out and say, this is what I expect. Is that what you
yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that preserving things in, creating an artifact, capturing the notes from the conversation, it's it's way more successful than simply verbalizing it, because we all have, you never know where someone's at that day. They may be dealing with a ton of different distractions. It may be maybe a couple of days before they pick that piece of work back up. So having something to kind of preserve that, those decisions or those expectations, to me is the best way, because then you're immediately able to pull that back up and say, all right, here's where we left off. Let's continue.
Thank you. I think that's quite important. I was just thinking, as you were saying that, I was just thinking about, I used to listen to a lot of self-development tapes, and Stephen Covey was one of the things that I listened to. And it was talking about telling his younger son how to manage the yard, and said, this is your yard. You are the steward of this, keeping this. And the rule was green and clean. And these are what I expect, but how you do that is up to you. So as you were saying, in terms of expectations, it is to say, this is what I want to see, but it's up to you to make it work. So that was what was going through my head. Now, you were talking about, so you went to university and you've met a whole young people joining your company and recruiting into your team. Do you feel that for this day and age, that a university degree is still important?
I read a lot of, I see lots of, I read a lot about the commentary about it. I'd say, it definitely teaches you something. Like what it does is it trains your brain to learn things and to apply things. And there's something to be said about having 4 years of practice versus 2 versus none. So, I see a lot of stuff around, some of the schools of thought that I've seen recently is that 4-year degree versus 2 years. And sometimes it's pretty hard to argue. It's like, for those 4-year degrees, I had to take a lot of extraneous classes, we call them electives, that really did not contribute much, if anything, to where I'm at as a professional or my career. I took a recreational and forestry class. I took an archery class. I think I took weightlifting twice. There's just the physical classes are great, but there's something to be said about trying to modernize the classroom experience and solving actually problems that organizations have, and doing case studies. And really in my life, my studies, I only spent about 2 years of my degree program doing that. So, and I've got team members who don't have a 4-year degree at all on my team, but what they do have is experience that applies well to the problems and tasks that they're having to solve. So I think to answer your question, the view is changing. When we're posting jobs, I always make sure that language says, if it says 4-year degree, which oftentimes is kind of like a HR type of mandate, it's usually not like something the hiring manager usually cares about. Like the last thing I'm looking on someone's resume is the education. It should always be ordered with your experience up top, and that education, at least that is on my resume. So for me, I say a 4-year degree or experience, applicable experience in lieu of. And so that kind of, to me, leaves it wide open for candidates.
I think I'm of a very similar mindset. Although I think we both come from a slightly more privileged background, because it costs money to go to university. And I was just reading a post about this lawyer from America, and she graduated in 2002, and she's just finished paying off, and I reckon it's very close to $500,000 in total, how much she had to pay back. So I was lucky enough to have parents who sacrificed to send me to university, And I think, just like you, that it has provided a very rounded view of how to learn critical thinking, problem solving, and just sitting down and articulating, comparing, contrasting, debating ideas. And that was quite useful. But nowadays, as you were saying, you've got this younger generation who already started on their, I'd say, entrepreneurship type learning and journey around creating maybe podcasts and newsletters and not-for-profits and things like that. And so obviously my children are growing up, and I'm wondering if, because I'm in between, so you are meeting those coming out of university now, and mine will come, sort of like 6, 7, 8 years after that, and how that the trajectory of society, especially around technology, and whether universities, with Udemy and with all these online MOOC learn, the Khan Academy, whether structured university is still important. So your opinion and insight was very, very useful. Thank you about that.
I think my final thought on that, I think, is as you mentioned those other platforms. To me, the most valuable experience in college, wasn't reading the textbooks or the parties or the sports games or, the school traditions, but the experience of group projects, because I think that correlates the most to what it's like in the working world. I mean, whether you're going to be an entrepreneur, an army of one. I mean, I think that you're going to need to be able to, or work in the corporate world, you're going to need to be able to work well with others. And I think for me personally, those group projects, you deal with the same scenarios that you do in the working world. You've got people who are not pulling their weight. You've got the overachiever. You've got the person that wants to do, like all of that wants to own a certain portion, or you've got to find the strengths of individuals and divvy up the work accordingly. And you've got to all be accountable and manage conflict. And so really, to me, those skills and finding a way to build those types of skills, whether it's in a university or whether it's in online learning platforms, that's to me like what the problem is that they need to solve.
I think you're absolutely right. It's all about communication and teamwork. Although I have to say, as you were speaking, I was thinking back about my group projects, and we had somebody who did not care about passing or failing, and that is just like, oh, I do. And that was just crazy. Thank you for that. So just looking back on everything, I'd like to know if you can share some big life learning mistakes that you've made, if there's any that you'd like to share.
Big life. There's too many to list. And I don't want to repeat myself, but expectations, to me, like figuring out a way to communicate two ways expectations. Probably one of the biggest lessons that I still need to continue to do. Others would be recognizing the value in retros, and looking back on your career, on your projects, realizing there's three things that come out of a good retro: what went well, what didn't go well, and then what you want to change. And so thinking about those, thinking about problems and experiences in those constructs, and most importantly, figuring out like what you're going to do to change in the future, I think is critical. Another one, I guess, that I picked up along the way was this concept of professional baggage. And we all carry emotional baggage with us, right? Whether it's, experiences with significant others or children or parents or family. That creates all of those lifelong experiences. We all carry it, emotional baggage, but we also have a form of professional baggage, and that can surface in multiple ways. Comparing oneself to others, trying to take on the world, or never feeling like you're getting the recognition that you deserve. There's 20 million other flavors of that. And I think one of the most important lessons is realizing that baggage, the definition of baggage is it's something you carry with you. And, you don't really, there's sometimes you may not ever be able to let it go. And so I've worked in a ton of different industries with organizations, big 95,000, 100,000 organizations, to anything to much smaller, 1,000 employee shops, and maybe even smaller than that. And what I've realized is that I carry the same set of thoughts and expectations and internal professional baggage, no matter what the job is. And we often think that we're going to leave something behind. We're moving jobs and getting a new title, or getting more pay, or working in a different industry. But the frustrating thing can be the fact that those same thoughts that you thought you were leaving behind can start to creep in. And I think it's just important to recognize that what it is and what you're carrying with you, so you can do everything to mitigate it and minimize it.
That's really useful. Thank you for that. Do you have one person who has impacted you the most growing up?
Growing up, I was actually gonna answer that in a professional sense.
Okay.
So I would say is a manager who gave me the start in the industry that I ultimately wanted to do. And that was getting that first job as a business analyst. So this individual, I had very little experience, and I had found I was interviewing with, he was the SVP of corporate operations at a large mortgage lending institution, and this is back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, and he took a chance on me and gave me the opportunity to grow into a business analyst, make a ton of mistakes on his dime, on his timeline, but also give me the opportunity, the training opportunities, the breadth of projects to really expand my knowledge and instill a sense of passion and enthusiasm and ownership. And so I still stay in contact with him and recognize and frankly thank him on a not as often as I should, but really just saying, thank you again for the opportunity that you gave me, and being able to kind of start my career off in a certain direction, because I felt like I was listless before that.
I think it's amazing because he has not just impacted you, but I would hazard a guess that you have brought that leadership style to your current role, and that your team is benefiting actually by proxy the lessons that you've learned from him. And it sounds like he created a safe environment for you to learn, to make mistakes, and to grow. And that seems like, to me, has always been a recipe for just creating great team, great connections between people. And I would, like I say, hazard a guess that you've brought that into your style.
Oh, I think so. I think that.
Sorry, I can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear you. You sound great.
Just give me a moment. I'm wondering whether I've run out of battery. But we'll switch to. Can you say something?
Can you hear me? No?
Yes. All good now. Right. I don't know what happened there. You just went.
All right.
Okay. Yes. So it sounds like you brought that style of management, people management, leadership to your team as well.
I hope so. I think it's something that I take a lot. I put a lot of emphasis and value in some of those lessons, and just in treating people the way that I wanted to be treated. That professional baggage about not getting recognized and feeling like I wasn't appreciated. I don't do it enough, but I really do internalize that and try and apply those principles to the team.
It's amazing, that when you do something like that, you're touching a lot more lives than just the people under your care. So here's a question. Have you watched the movie Sliding Doors?
Yes, I have.
So do you have a sliding door moment?
Oh gosh, sliding door moment where my life could have taken. Yeah, I guess it probably would have just been trying to find that first job out of university. Coming with a certain degree. They, at least, I don't know how it is now, but you were the companies and opportunities that you were presented with were very much, for the most part, aligned to your degree program. So a lot of the stuff that I was, the roles and the jobs that I was interviewing were for accounting firms. That was a big play. At the time it was like the big six. Now it's like the big four. But a lot of those accounting roles where you'd be exposed as an auditor to a company and learn some new industry. So I think if I went on several of those interviews, made it to multiple steps through, and I think if I would have taken that path, I would have been in, and no offense to the accountants of the world, but a much less creative profession than the world of technology. And I think that, so I'm thankful. I think I took a meandering path by going into retail first and finding my way, but I think that was probably one of my early moments.
Thank you. Sorry, your answer and something else is just kind of like crystallized into this question that I want to ask. And just circling back to, so I know you were recruiting for junior Salesforce admins, and then you had a lot of responses, and then we exchanged some messages about that, and then you spoke about this young lady that you decided to put her through the process. So just to kind of close up our chat today, can you identify in the process from beginning to end how someone what are the things that someone can do to put themselves in the forefront of the process at every stage for a position in your company? So from the beginning right up to when they get an opportunity to speak to you, and for every step, can you help me break that down?
Yeah. So I'm not, people shouldn't be shy, and I'm not shy to engage with people. So, but what you've got to realize as a potential candidate that you're putting yourself out there when you're reaching out to that hiring manager. And if hiring managers are anything like me, they're getting hit all the time with pitches for things, services and salespeople, and would you like this, and are you interested in that? But what you need to realize is your message should provide something of value, something that presents yourself in a light that is intriguing, where they want to be interested in you. You're demonstrating some knowledge and understanding of the job, ideally the company too. Maybe you're asking some probing questions, or maybe you're taking some recent news and actually seeing, like I saw the company was doing X, Y, and Z. I didn't know if you were leveraging Salesforce to support, those initiatives or things like that. So to me, it's asking thought-provoking questions. And what happened with this young lady was, actually I saw some things on her resume, and I decided to, ask her some couple questions, like, tell me a little bit more about that experience, because I wanted to know. She gave really thoughtful answers that to me was good enough to put her through the process. Other things that people can do is realizing that an interview is not just one way. It's not just the person asking you questions, but come up with some questions like those. They don't have to be industry. They don't have to be specific about the company, but just like those ones that we talked about earlier about leadership style, or how do you work well with the team, or what's a recent win that's been celebrated. Those kinds of things, as well as, I think, just follow-ups. It's hard to not see the value in someone sending like a thank you note. It doesn't need to be a handwritten letter mailed, which is what I used, which was the old school of thought. But a simple email. Thank you again for your time. I think that my experience with this and that and the other, and then what you said about X, Y, and Z makes me really excited to continue the conversation. Those kinds of things can't hurt.
Oh, that's amazing. I think for me, when I started the part 2 of the conversation, I thought this is going to be me just learning more about you, because I'm just a very curious person, or nosy, that made you what you've become today. But also, I think what's really great about the conversation is that you brought so much value also to my listeners, not just me, especially around, when you're talking about your path through the education system and how you got your job, as well as we also talked about the younger generation that you've been interviewing and how they might take the first step into the Salesforce ecosystem, or even working with yourself, for example. So you provide a huge amount of value there, not just to me, but also to the audience. So I just really want to thank you for making time, second time, to talk to me today, Chris.
Oh, thanks so much, Pei. I really appreciate you sharing your time with me and giving me the opportunity to hear from you. And you've asked a lot of thought-provoking questions. So thank you.
I'm glad. I really enjoyed this. So thank you so much again, Chris. We'll speak to you.
Thanks.